And now, I believe it's the case that, in 1997, Tony Blair got far more working class votes than Jeremy Corbyn did in 2017, yes. despite Corbyn having a dramatically more, if to say it in Marxist way, like objectively pro working class platform, right? And so yes. Piketty has an interesting theory about this, right?
So it works like this. As we know, education is probably the best way to raise the overall welfare of a nation, right? So starting in the US, it was before that, but in Western Europe, after the war, massive investments in education and public education and universities. And so you raise an entire class of people who are very educated, and they tend to vote for the Social Democratic Party, right? Because these are the policies that they find rational, and they have an attachment to that. But the problem is this: you have these, and this is something. It's funny because when you're French, you always knew that the Socialist Party was the party of your professors in class. Like all the professors.
Guilty.
You're like all the professors, like they're socialists. Of course they're socialists. And with the occasional Trotskyist who was doing entryism and something like that. So it's the party of Brahmin. The Brahmin left is that it's those highly educated elites, who became elite because of redistributive policies. But the effect of that, the outcome of that is that, the social democratic parties had to, represent the interests and the desires of people who in the end had very little in common with their parents who were workers. And the divorce between the working class and the Social Democratic Party is something Piketty traces that to like the early 80s. So right at an interesting moment in the history of capitalism. And it seems that there's a drift in the Social Democratic parties towards, the politics of, what he calls the Brahmin left. Enlightened, self-interest, globalization, competition is okay because we have the tools in an economy that is moving towards, knowledge, and where there's a premium for knowledge in the knowledge economy. And so knowledge workers, cultural workers tend to do well. As we know, sort of. So
is this Macron and Mayor Pete basically representing, or what? How would you?
So it's kind of funny because Macron, in the end, is very much like to Piketty. He is sort of like the lab-grown synthesis of the Brahmin left and what he calls the mercantile right. So opposite in the elite, opposite the Brahmin left, you have the old money that lives off of its owning assets. So this is the mercantile right. And you see that division in the US as well, where the mercantile right is more directly represented by the Republican Party, whereas the Brahmin left is more represented by Mayor Pete and the sort of the centrist Democratic Party. And so this convergence of constituencies, Macron represents that convergence of constituencies. To be fair, there were some political scientists in France a year and a half ago who had described that interesting recombination of the political field. They're called Amable and what's his name?
We can look it up.
Yeah, it's but there's been a discussion of the sort of the knowledge Brahmin left joining up with the mercantile right to promote globalization. And this is our jam, right? This is right where we fit, and we want to have a discussion because what does it mean for the workers and for the constituencies that are not necessarily represented, whose interests, it's not that they're not represented, it's like their interests, their objective interests are not represented by the programs and agendas of the mercantile right and the Brahmin left. The Brahmin left was really in France substituted social democracy for Europe. and Europe became the project of the left-wing elite in France in the 80s. And he has a lot to say about that. Like, the European Commission and the way the European Union was designed is profoundly anti-democratic and, is all for competition, but does not protect workers. You have all these sort of weird, I mean, Zuckman and says, you know, in their book about taxing the rich, they're like, they mention, you know, the countries that are the biggest, tax havens in the world, they're like part of the European Union. And we're talking Luxembourg and Ireland and the Netherlands. These are countries that are part of the European Union and have a seat at the table. And they encourage, the sort of profit shifting and the hollowing out of the welfare state in other countries. So this is what the left in France, in Italy, in Germany, and in Spain brought about. And even, you know, the New Labour, like Blair and all that. This is what the left brought about and it seems that, and he has kind of a wistful discussion of why that happened, especially, you know, once communism failed, because these social democrats were anti-communist, you know, it's the second left. And why didn't they seize upon, the fall of the Soviet Union and the communist bloc to actually push for more redistribution? And he says wistfully, well, you know, they sort of dropped out because it was like, why do we need to do that since there's not going to be any pressure anymore?